The morning had barely begun when the quiet corner of the cafe shifted forever. A single dad sat by the window, watching raindrops slide down the fogged glass, his hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee he'd barely touched. His daughter, a small girl with messy hair and tired eyes, folded paper napkins into tiny boats, letting them float lazily on the surface of her orange juice. They looked like two souls trying to hold themselves together in a world that had taken more from them than it had given. And then came the softest whisper he had ever heard, a voice so fragile that it trembled in the air like a leaf about to fall. "Can I sit here?" it asked, and everything inside him stilled, because the woman standing in front of him looked like someone carrying a story she was afraid to tell. He moved his coffee aside with gentle hands and looked up, silently fighting the instinct to remain guarded, and replied in a voice almost too soft for his own nature. "Only if you both stay. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the magic of unexpected moments, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support truly keeps stories like this alive." The cafe smelled of roasted beans and warm bread, but beneath those familiar scents lived something deeper that morning, an ache shared by three strangers whose pain recognized one another long before their words did. The woman looked unsure, glancing behind her toward a little boy who clung to her coat, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his eyes too quiet for his age. She hesitated for a moment before guiding him to sit beside her at the small wooden table. The dad watched her with a cautious curiosity, sensing a loneliness that mirrored his own. His daughter paused her napkin boats and blinked at the newcomers, her innocent curiosity shining through the exhaustion she often tried to hide. The woman kept her hands wrapped around her purse as if letting go would unravel something inside her. She had the appearance of someone fighting a long battle alone, her clothes neat but worn, her shoulders stiff with the weight of unspoken fears. She breathed slowly, as though each breath had to be convinced to stay. The dad recognized it instantly, the look of someone who had run out of places to rest. He didn't ask questions. He didn't stare too long. He simply offered presence, and somehow that alone kept the moment from shattering. The cafe grew busier, filled with laughter from students and murmurs from business people, but at their table, a soft silence carried the raw humanness of people trying to piece themselves back together. The dad noticed how the woman's hands trembled slightly every time she adjusted the boy's jacket or brushed crumbs from his cheek. She was careful, almost overly gentle, as if the world had taught her that love had to be measured carefully, or it would be taken away. His daughter, noticing the boy's shy posture, pushed one of her paper boats toward him. It was a wordless gesture, pure and childlike, but it opened the first small bridge between the two tired families. The boy touched the paper boat with wide eyes filled with surprise, and something in the woman's face softened, as if hope, dusty and forgotten, had been gently nudged awake. The dad smiled quietly. He hadn't seen his daughter share something so freely in months, not since her mother passed away in the early winter, leaving behind a home that still smelled of her perfume, a closet full of clothes the dad couldn't bring himself to touch, and a silence that settled into the corners of their lives like cold dust. His daughter had stopped talking much, retreating into little worlds of paper crafts and whispered daydreams. The dad carried guilt like a second skin, wondering every day whether he was enough for her, whether he could be both the shelter and the sun. And now, unexpectedly, a small moment in a cafe made him feel like the world might still be capable of stitching people back together. The woman across from him blinked often, as though holding back tears. Her son leaned against her arm, exhausted but safe in her presence. She touched his hair absent-mindedly, her movements instinctive and protective. The dad watched them with a gentle familiarity, sensing a story so fragile it had to be held carefully. He wasn't wrong. Her life had not been kind. She had left a home where love turned into bruises, where hope turned into fear, where promises turned into traps. She had escaped with nothing but a small suitcase, and her son's tiny hand held tightly in hers. For weeks she had searched for stability, shelters, temporary jobs, a safe corner where her boy could sleep without flinching at every sound. Some days she succeeded, some days she didn't. But she kept going because mothers know how to fight even when their hearts shatter. Today she had come into the cafe because it was warm, and because she didn't know where else to go. The dad didn't know the details, but he recognized the look in her eyes. He'd been learning the unspoken language of pain ever since he became both mother and father overnight. It changed the way he saw the world. It made him notice the tremble in the woman's breath, the faint bruise under her sleeve, the shadows beneath her gaze that told him she had cried far too recently. But he didn't push. He didn't pry. Sometimes the most powerful kindness is quiet. His daughter began telling the boy about the paper boat she named Brave Captain Oliver. Her voice was soft at first, uncertain from months of staying silent, but gradually it warmed, carrying the sound of a child remembering how to feel safe. The woman smiled at the sight, covering her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed by the gentleness being extended toward them. Time slipped forward, unhurried, as two families who had never met began to feel like they were holding on to something familiar. The dad found himself telling the woman how he visited this cafe every Sunday morning with his daughter, because it was the only place that didn't feel emptier after his wife's passing. The woman listened with eyes full of empathy, her heart aching for a man carrying so much alone. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer cliches. She simply listened, and that somehow felt more healing than words. When she finally spoke, her voice wavered like a quiet confession. She said she and her son had been moving often, staying with friends when possible, improvising when not. She didn't give details, but the dad understood the lines between her words. He didn't judge. He didn't ask. He just nodded with sincerity that made her eyes glisten. The boy, now comfortable, reached out for another paper boat, and the dad watched as the two children began to create a small fleet together. His daughter's smile, real, bright, unforced, made his throat tighten. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen that kind of light in her expression. As the morning turned into noon, the rain softened, the cafe thinned out, and the warmth at their table deepened. The woman kept looking at the door as if afraid someone from her past might walk in. The dad noticed and gently shifted his chair, positioning himself slightly between her and the entrance, offering protection without making it obvious. Gratitude flickered in her eyes, tender and silent. Hours passed without the world rushing them. The dad ordered food for the kids, pretending he was simply hungry so the woman wouldn't feel uncomfortable accepting kindness. She saw through it immediately but didn't stop him. She couldn't. Her son hadn't eaten a warm meal since yesterday afternoon. For the first time in a long while, the woman's shoulders relaxed. Her hands stopped trembling. Her eyes wandered the cafe not with fear but with something almost like hope. The dad's presence made her feel that maybe, just maybe, the world still had safe people in it. The children laughed at something silly. The sound rose through the cafe like a small miracle. The dad felt his heart swell painfully, realizing how deeply he had missed the sound of laughter in his home. He didn't know what came next. He just knew he didn't want them to leave. As the day wore on, they talked about small things, childhood memories, favorite foods, dreams they hadn't dared to voice in years. The woman said she used to love painting. The dad said he once dreamed of opening a small bookshop. They looked at each other with an understanding that only two wounded, rebuilding hearts could share. When she finally stood up, the sun was dipping low, turning the wet streets golden. She thanked him with a voice soft but full of emotion. She gathered her son's hand and began to step away slowly, as though walking out of a warm place into the cold again. The dad felt something inside him tighten. He didn't want this to end here, but he also knew that some people needed space to return on their own terms. He watched her walk toward the door, her son glancing back at the table filled with paper boats. His daughter watched too, her expression quiet but hopeful. The woman opened the door, letting the cool air seep in, and then she paused. She turned around slowly, her eyes meeting his with a question she couldn't voice. He understood. He gently pushed one chair back toward the table and nodded. She returned. And this time, the smile she carried was small, but real. If this story is touching your heart even a little, please support the video with a like, comment, share, and subscribe. It truly helps us continue making meaningful stories for you. Before the ending, please comment down below, everyone deserves a safe place. The dad walked them home that evening, not because he wanted to intrude, but because the woman accepted when he offered. Her son held his daughter's hand while they hopped over puddles, their laughter echoing softly through the streetlights. The dad walked beside the woman, each step measured, careful not to cross boundaries she wasn't ready to dissolve. She told him she didn't know what tomorrow looked like. He told her he didn't know either, but maybe tomorrow didn't have to be faced alone. When they reached the small building where she was temporarily staying, she hesitated again, wanting to say more but not knowing how. He simply nodded gently, telling her through silence that she didn't owe him explanations and that she had every right to return only when she felt ready. She held her son close, her eyes shining with something unspoken but deeply grateful. They parted ways, but only physically. Hearts do not separate so easily once they have recognized each other's loneliness. A week later, she returned to the cafe at the same hour, wearing a softer expression and holding her son's hand with the ease of someone no longer running. The dad and his daughter were there as usual, waiting, hoping, though neither would admit it. When she approached the table again, her whisper was steadier this time. "Can we sit here?" The dad moved his coffee aside, not out of hesitation but out of quiet joy, and repeated the words that had begun everything. "Only if you both stay." And this time, they did. Because sometimes family is not made by blood, but by the gentle courage of broken hearts choosing to heal together. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your engagement truly helps this channel grow and keeps emotional stories alive.